now?
Yes, please.
Hello, everyone, and a very good evening to you all. Myself, Solu Gautam, and today, on behalf of Mero Eye team, I'll be hosting the current session. And I extend a very warm welcome to each one of you who have been connected with us to our iTalks webinar. Also, I would like to thank you all for taking the time out from your busy schedule and marking our program with your invaluable presence. Thank you for joining with us. And also don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel so you can be in touch with our program in the upcoming days. Now, I would like to step forward to inaugurate today's session, and also I would like to notify you all that we will be having our discussion session at the end of the webinar. So, if you get any queries in between the session, just drop them on our comment section. We will get back to you later on. Today, as a speaking delegate, we have Dr. Alan Glazier, all the way from USA, and he will be talking about the comparison of suggested myopia control methods. Before he begins, I would like to give a general introduction. Dr. Allen is an OD, fellow of the American Academy of Optometry, and founder and visionary behind ODs on Facebook and odsonfacebook.com, and also founder of Study Group I and Vision Cure in Rockville, Maryland. He is also a partner and business development executive in Kepler Vision, a podium lecturer on clinical practice, marketing, and myopia control topics. He was also selected as one of the 50 most influential optometrists of all time by his peers. He has won multiple awards including Presidential Medal, New England College of Optometry in 2019. I welcome you, Dr. Alan, on behalf of Mero Eye Foundation and all our participants.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And I, again, must apologize to everyone for the delay and the pushback. That was my fault. And I'll make it up with a great talk and help you guys out in the future as well. I would love to be in Nepal presenting. That would be very exciting. So maybe that'll happen in the future too. Let's wish for health, happiness, and things to return to normal so that can happen someday. Now, I heard that you had Dr. Mark Bullimore presenting the other day on myopia control. Mark is a friend of mine and an incredible lecturer, very smart guy. I'm sure it was very high level. Mine is going to be more applicable to the clinical practice of myopia control, and it is going to also focus on what we know about methods of myopia control that have been suggested to work, and whether we know they work, whether we now know they don't work based on peer-reviewed research, or whether they don't work as well as we thought, or better than we thought. And that's the angle of this talk. And my experience with this comes from my experience of managing myopia in clinic for 25 years. So I worked in this, in managing myopia before there was any great data, and I've adjusted my practice throughout the years as the science has evolved and the data has come out to support some methods over others. And that's when I came up with the idea of this talk. These are my disclosures. Now, in the U.S., we know that myopia is a worldwide problem, much more prevalent in Asia than here. In the U.S., it's starting to gain recognition as a growing problem as well, which we're a little late to the game here. And my Asian patients have always taken myopia seriously, have always looked at it as a disease, and my non-Asian patients have not done that, and it's turning out that the Asian patients were correct. Myopia is a disease and needs to be viewed as one, because if you look at these statistics, they're off the chart in Asia more than the US, but again, it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's growing worldwide, and we will soon, unfortunately, catch up to this for many reasons. Let's talk a little bit about background about myopia. Most of the people on this call probably don't need these few slides, but I do want their good background for some of the data we're going to present. Typically, we see myopia developing around age 8, progressing through age of 15 or 16, at an average rate of half diopter a year. That's a baseline that we use, that half diopter, down to later we'll talk about how we determine the level of success we're having based on this average change in an average population. Of course, there's a bell curve of distribution here. Not everybody is 15 or 16 changing an half diopter a year. People change much faster than that and much longer and later into life. but these are just generalizations right here that we see in clinic, mostly in the US. One of the shocking things is that historically we've always just assumed that binocular and accommodative stimuli have been behind much of the change, if not all of it. And if you look at the peer-reviewed research, there's little to no evidence that these things impact progression, which is shocking. It's also very hard for a seasoned optometrist who've been around for a while to absorb this and actually believe it. But what we assume from seeing a small number of patients in the clinic having low number of subjects isn't always what the science reveals. We know that age is the most important determinant of the progression, and this is typically what we see. But again, these numbers are useless unless we qualify it against the patient's race, because there is a strong genetic component, stronger in certain races than others. The suggested factors historically of things that have caused myopic progression are age, ethnicity, near work. In other words, how much near work are we doing? We assumed somewhat incorrectly that, well, that's not true. We assume, we see that people who do more near work have generally thicker glasses or continue to change faster. And we made the assumption that that was based on the accommodative response. But one of the other things that happens when we do near work is we deprive our peripheral vision of focus. And in doing that, we believe that if near work is an issue and creating this massive wave of myopia that we see growing worldwide because our environments have changed, then it's more likely it's the depriving our peripheral vision of focus than it is related to our accommodative efforts. And this is how we need to change hearts and minds in optometry, and how we need to think about near work being a problem. The mode of refractive correction can impact this. The parental history can impact this. And hours of time spent outdoors has been suggested to impact this. We're going to review all of these things throughout this talk in detail and present studies and data and show you how much of an impact they may or may not have. The first longitudinal epidemiological study was recently completed, and this is the results. There is an overall increase from 79.5 to 87%. And so you can see severe myopia increased dramatically, more than doubled. So this study is the first time we've been able to look at these numbers longitudinally, and it's very important. So we know that the prevalence is increasing dramatically. Now, for patients over 5 diopters, there's 40 times the risk of developing geographic atrophy from macular degeneration. So we know there's a real serious public health toll that myopia is caused by. So for everyone, mostly I'm referring to people in our country who don't view myopia as a disease, here's some of the proof it is. The risk of this increased almost 40% for every additional diopter. So at 6 diopters, those people have a 40% greater, and at 7 diopters, 40% greater. They're averaged, not additive, but you get the point. There's a 22 times risk of retinal detachment for people over -8. This is a recent study by Genuine and Guido Ocean. It's a very, very, very well-respected study and scary at the same time. So there is no safe level of myopia because even 1 diopter has an increased risk of eye disease later in life. The risk factor with the disease, the causative agent, is the expanding axial length and stretching of the retina in the axial direction, thinning of the retina, and the risks that come with that. So we know that earlier efforts to control progression reduce these risks of blindness later in life. And that's something that because of that, it's a major public health issue that we need to pay attention to. So when patients ask me, what is the youngest patient you can treat? We will treat them at any age, and in different ways, of course, by their age. But we know that we might save a certain percentage of these children from blindness later in life and help them as well as the public health as well. So there have been proposed theories behind myopic. I call it creep or myopic change, however you want to refer to it, but you'll hear me refer to it as creep or creeping of the axial length over time. And historically, as we've discussed already a couple times, and I'm going to keep going back to this, accommodation has been, no pun intended, the focus of the focus of the research. They believe that the reason that accommodation might impact the axial length was mechanical. In other words, pulling of the ciliary body during accommodation. And it varied in people because the different genetics of people have different scleral and choroidal structural integrities. Makes sense if you think about it as possibly. The other theory is the proposed theory of peripheral deprivation. So there were some studies done many years ago, maybe in the 1970s, where they took animal models and deprived one eye of its peripheral vision and the other eye undeprived, and the eye whose peripheral vision was deprived of form vision but able to receive light changed dramatically to the eye that was not deprived of the peripheral deprivation. So they've been looking at that as a cause as well. Now we know that when we read, what happens? We converge, and the light focuses less peripherally and more centrally. So we also accommodate as well. So one or both of those is the suggested cause for myopic creep, or if they both are, one is a lot more than the other. Nutrition has been suggested. Many studies have looked into nutrition, and there's some very interesting data we'll present about nutrition. Lack of sunlight, and peripheral hyperblur, which is similar to peripheral deprivation, and we're going to dig down on that soon. So the assumption with accommodation was that near work and the accommodative working distance and convergence played a role, but the study, the largest study, the CLEAR study, showed that near work in a huge subject, so 4,500 subjects, near work had no impact for myopes. And Wu also, in a study in ophthalmology in 2013, showed similar thing. Now, atropine has been shown to prevent myopia and axial elongation in studies after accommodation is removed from the eye. There are studies where in animals they damage the Edge-Fall nucleus or resected an optic nerve, and obviously in both those instances, that eye has no accommodation. So why did it's atropine so axial elongation in these patients? Obviously, there's something other than accommodation going on there. They believe that atropine chemically affects the cells in the retina that stimulate the axial elongation of the eye, but not accommodation. So if not accommodation, then what? There's that Sally trigger, which we believe is located around or stronger above or below or to the side of the macula the retina peripheral macula. I'm sure Dr. Bullimore talked at length about this. We call that area the area that regulates emmetropization or normalization of the axial length of the eye. It regulates scleral expansion as well. It's signaling the brain to slow the eye growth based on where light falls, either in front, on, or at a virtual focus behind the retina, just peripheral to the macula. Now in a picture, this is what it looks like. The central arrow is pointing at fovea. And we now know that the way light hits or doesn't hit the fovea does not impact refractive development, but the way that light impacts the area peripheral to the macula fovea, those other two arrows do impact the refractive development and the axial elongation of the eye. So if we can, the thought was the first thing we're going to talk about today, if we can impact where light falls in that periphery without impacting the clarity of the macula, then we may find a way to manage this myopic creep. So we call this first method we're going to talk about peripheral refraction or peripheral refraction. Now, historically, before we knew any of this, so none of us are guilty of doing anything bad for our patients, unless we did it but we didn't know this. When we prescribe a single focus lens, either an ophthalmic lens, an eyeglass lens, or a contact lens, this is the optic situation. We have a single focus. We push, let's assume this is a myope because there's obviously a minus lens in front of that eye. We push light back to the fovea to create foveal emetropia, clear vision for the patient, but it's only single focus. So you can see how the light peripheral to the fovea falls to an imaginary focal point behind. And we believe that we call this hyperopic defocus, peripheral to the macula. And we believe that that's the stimulus for elongation. The eyeball, because the light that falls in the periphery of the macula it has a blur, the signals the brain to expand the eye in the axial direction backwards until it clears the vision. It's chasing the light, and that causes that axial expansion. Now, we had no way to control this. We didn't even know about this. So, we're not monsters at the refracting device. We didn't know that while we were correcting people, we were also chasing it. Of course, know that people would come back every year, but we didn't know what our role was in this. Now, the goal now is to bring that light peripherally into the eye with using different optics when we're talking about the peripheral hyperopic defocus or the peripheral vision that we're talking about. In myopia control, optically, what we do is bend that peripheral light into the eye so that it no longer acts as a stimulus for axial eye growth. So you can, sorry, I went backward. Whoops, how come I'm going the wrong way? You can see here in a standard lens, which falls with the hyperopic defocus, that is causing the situation to worsen and the axial length to elongate. And then we bend it in, and all of a sudden, we're reducing axial elongation by 60% or more in these children. Myopia control using lenses. Here's another example, another picture showing how this looks like in the clinic. The multifocal optic, the periphery to focus within the eye and control the axial elongation. And this is achieved with several different methods: orthokeratology, distance center contact lenses, MySight, the newest contact lens, which is not a multifocal, described as a multifocal by the company, and there are even some eyeglass options that are coming out that claim to do this as well. If you look at the optics, this is the optics of an ortho-K pattern. You can see how the steeper area created OK peripheral to the macula brings that light within the eye. By increasing the relative corneal refractive power in the peripheral corner, we light into the eye in the areas that are within the pupillary line of sight is even more important. And that's how we achieve our myopia control for these patients. Inverted pattern, we also call it. Myopic defocus. So we go from the hyperopic defocus to the myopic defocus, and we give our patients the benefit of 60% or more of reduction in elongation and prescription creep as well. So the ortho-K exerts a pushing against the central corneal and the mid-peripheral cornea. It does not push on anything but the epithelium. The stroma of the cornea is not impacted by ortho-K. What you're doing is you're rolling the epithelium into a lens shape. You're thinning the central epithelium and extracting or pulling out the peripheral to create a minus lens in front of the eye with the epithelium. There's no evidence the stroma undergoes any sustained bending. Thus, it's safe in that sense. And at least 5 studies have shown, in comparison with controls, that a reduction in the progression of myopia using ortho as much as 63% per year in subjects of different ethnicities. In my practice, I've done my own informal study, and I've seen that as high as 85% of people get this benefit, and maybe even higher. At that point, you have to question the numbers when it's not peer-reviewed or controlled, but I believe it's even higher than that. Here are some studies, I'm sure Dr. Bullimore referred to these a lot, of evidence-based claims for myopia control. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. The SMART study is the one that we look to in the U.S. as one of the preeminent studies. Although the axial length measurement was unreliable, there was a large subject cohort in children of age 11 to 14, the age where there's the greatest change. And the Ortho-K group produced by almost 9 times less than the soft lens wearers, which is highly significant. The Charm and Cho study was a 2-year randomized study, which had the highest rate. It showed a 63% stabilization rate, so no worsening. Tremendous. And then Li, Wang, and Chu did a 12-year study. It was a retrospective study, cohort study, meaning they looked at all the other studies and studied them and compared the data, and they found that the Ortho-K, it was normal to have a change of 0.2 to 0.3 diopters, and within single vision spectacle controls, those patients in the control group changed 0.4 to half diopter a year. So these are just some of the other studies that we look to that were randomized, prospective, or controlled clinical trials that consistently show between 40 to 60% of slowing of myopia progression with Ortho-K. These are all peer-reviewed as well. There's at least 9 studies that confirm. Now, one of the things I like to talk about is there's a big difference between Ortho-K and Ortho-K that achieves myopia control. Anyone who's practiced Ortho-K knows that many patients come in seeing very well, but when you put them on the topographer, you get a image like this. Now, because this image shows that there is no or not much peripheral hyperopia being provided this patient, you are able to mold their cornea to a degree where foveally you're giving them emmetropia and they're reporting good vision. But peripherally, you may not be giving them what they need to have that myopic defocus and lessen the hyperopic defocus. So it's very important to make sure that at the end, if you're trying to drive myopia control with your Ortho-K patients, that your pattern looks similar to this in the end, and that the steep area, the red in the topography, falls within the foveal line of sight. Because if that light, if that peripheral myopia is not getting into the eye, you're not getting the effect. If it falls in the iris, the light is not entering the eye. So this is the difference between Ortho-K versus Ortho-K that provides myopia control. I like to point out. Here's a good picture of the pupil for a myopia control design. In an adult, you may not have to worry about myopia control, so it won't matter if you look at the image on the right, whether you fall exactly within the pupil or not. But for a child or somebody who you're concerned about, you really want to get that area down within that pupillary line of sight by reducing the treatment zone generally. So defocus, there's other types of defocus. There's aberrations, there's astigmatism, and we don't believe that they really have much control when it comes to eye growth, but the spherical defocus is really what we're focused on. So let's move to a different tool optically, the soft distance center multifocal lenses, which create this myopic defocus in the periphery optically similar in a different way, but similar to what the results are for Ortho-K. There's been many studies. Jeff Willeen out of Ohio State is one of my favorite researchers, and he has shown multiple studies that have slowed myopic progression. 4 of them have demonstrated the positive effect, and the percent of success is very similar to what we see with orthokeratology. So we kind of get a clue from that this light bending that we're doing is really working. Here are some of the studies. The soft multifocals have shown from 30 to 50% slowing of myopic progression as well. And so these are some of the brands that work to achieve this. Synergize, this in the US, I'm not sure what you have in Nepal. Worldwide, Synergize Biofinity Multifocal, where I like to use the high additions, as high as the child can tolerate. Natural View Multifocal is a really cool tool with a pinhole optic that has one addition. Arguably, it's between 2.5 to 14 diopters, depending who you ask. And then there's a company coming out of Taiwan called Saint Shine with a product that I can't find much information on. So with the Biofinity lens, we fit the D lenses and we use the maximum ad. There's a study ongoing determining which is the correct ad to use, but I choose the maximum ad until the results of that study come out because I want to get the most peripheral myopia for this child. I correct them to 20/20, And then I check them in a 1 to 2 week follow-up to find out if they feel they're seeing clearly. And if they do, I maintain the highest add. If they're blurry, I can add minus to that lens because, again, adding minus isn't creating too much minus for them because you're still providing the myopic defocus. But if it's blurry, I can also reduce the add for those patients. The natural view, again, has a really high power range from +4 to -1225. And if you have access to this lens, which I'm not sure it's overseas yet, you can clear the vision with minus with these lenses. And then when you're finished because they're getting that pinhole effect that it increases depth of focus as well as myopic defocus. Now, the first FDA approval device came out recently, the MySight. It's indicated in children 8 to 12 years between -75 and 4 diopters of less than 3/4 diopters of astigmatism. And of course, and it's a one-day lens, disposable lens. Of course, you can apply it to children with higher powers. It's just that the Food and Drug Administration did not label it as, you can't really claim it has myopia control because they didn't study it over that. But the odds are, if it worked in those lower powers, it probably works in the higher powers and with children of different ages and possibly different or slightly higher levels of astigmatism. Having FDA claims is important because myopia control, while we know it worked and we had studies, we didn't have an official stamp of approval from a government on it. And that's why it's important, because by knowing that, it will drive public awareness. So the method of myopia control, managing that peripheral refraction, reducing the peripheral hyperopic blur, and increasing the myopic blur, is called managing peripheral refraction. We're going to grade these. We're going to give them blue, as you can see, if they work. And we believe they work. We have the studies to show they work. And it's pretty much accepted by the regulatory agency, the US FDA, that they work. So they win. This is one way you can offer your patients and know that you're offering them a good scientific option to help slow down or stop their myopic progression. Now, another way that we've heard that might help is gas permeable contact lenses. When I came up, my father was an optometrist, and when I came up under his tutelage, he always told me that these were better for myopia than soft lenses. Now, I just took him at his word because he was a very experienced and well-respected doctor. But what is it about these? Do we have data? Is there any studies that have been shown that gas permeable lenses actually help with myopia control? So, and we will grade this method as well. So there were studies done, again, by Jeff Willeen, the CLAMP study, which shows that RGP wearers progressed less than soft wearers, but when they stopped wearing the RGB lenses, the data regressed to the same. So there was no axial growth difference between the two groups. So this study says that RGP is not something that helps with axial length myopia control. And again, that's the only type we're concerned with because that's the only type that leads to disease. So we can't RX gas perms primarily with the claim that they do anything for myopia control based on this study. There was a study that compared a gas perm in one eye. Hello? I'm getting some feedback. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. Okay, thank you. In this study, we fit one eye with an ortho-K lens and the other with a gas perm lens to see how they reacted to that. And the ortho-K eye still significantly reduced the myopia progression. The gas perm eye did not. So we're going to grade the gas permeable lenses as a failing grade of a method to offer patients for myopia control. They seem to have no impact any more than soft lenses or single spherical lenses. The next method that we practice historically have been to prescribe bifocals, as with this child, high set, large segment, flat top 35 or executive bifocals to control. We thought we were controlling accommodation and that we were helping these children. So what do the studies say about this? Well, they're based on the proposed accommodative effort, which earlier we disproved, and the action, possibly reducing the action of the ciliary body stretching, and as a cause of increased axial length, which we know is not true. So we did see with these children a statistically significant 11 to 13% slowing of myopia progression, but it's irrelevant, and it only happened in people whose eyes were esophoric, who's turned in. And other trials had similar modest effects. And the reason that we're not going to use this method is because, A, we know that accommodation is not the cause of it. We know also that it's malpractice to recommend myopia control with a method where we know there are other methods that do a better job, unless for some reason the child cannot wear contact lenses. In that case, this is one way, if they're esophoric, that we can recommend that might help them. And the studies, the Comet 2 study, the Clear study, these were all studies that showed that this is the case. So we're going to give it a purple, a little mix of red and blue, because we know that it works to a degree, but not a significant degree. And it's not because of the accommodation effort. Undercorrection. This is one of my pet peeves. Somebody years ago suggested that maybe undercorrected, keeping people a little blurry, will be a cause for their myopic creep. But actually, we found that when studied, that it actually was worse for patients. Correcting them less than ametropic at the macula actually increased the myopic rate of scleral expansion over time in patients. Although in the short term, if you looked at this, you would see a greater increase in the the ametropic and overcorrected patients, but that was only short term. The long-term effect was the same, and there's several studies that have shown this. So it's considered not in a patient's best interest to undercorrect them. I know in my practice, we get patients all the time asking for this, and they're more frequently than not, they're Asian. And this might be something that culturally is talked about, but parents make assumptions about, but it's our duty to educate them that this is not in the child's best interest, even though they have it ingrained in their head that they don't want too strong a prescription. That's really not the problem. Of course, we don't want to overcorrect them dramatically either, but it's not in the patient's best interest to undercorrect, because you create certain challenges for the child. You put them at a disadvantage in terms of distance blur compared to their academic peers and things like that. So don't recommend that. Undercorrection gets a big red flag, gets an F, as we say over here. Pharmacological options. Well, atropine has been the drug of choice for managing myopia. What do we know about it? Well, historically it was used because we believed that by shutting down the accommodative effort that we would stop that pulling and that we were assuming was causing the axial elongation. Scleral growth was inhibited the synthesis of additional tissues that would allow the eye to expand as well. And we used very strong amounts of atropine, 1%. Now we know that it's not the impact atropine has on accommodation that is causing any impact, but there's some chemical trigger or cellular trigger in the retina peripheral to the macula that is stimulated positively against non-selective muscarinic receptors. In studies with 1% atropine, there was 90% reduction of progression. That's very, very powerful. And there are many, many studies. Now, 1%, of course, causes major side effects, rebound effects upon discontinuation, and there have even been reports in the FDA of death in children on higher doses under the age of 2 and under the age of 4, I heard as well. So this is not something we really want to use or have data to use below the age of 4. I wouldn't worry about killing any children with this, but it has happened. So we have to think about that in the really young children. So we experimented since with lower doses, 0.1% and 0.01%. And these can be used on any child 4 and older, any amount of myopia. They're well tolerated at these low concentrations with rare side effects. We do want to monitor the angles, excuse me for yawning, the anterior chamber angles due to the small risk of closing the child's angle. But again, very small risk. This is a good opportunity for patients not ready for ortho-K or soft multifocal lenses who want a greater effect than the bifocals will give them. Or they're not ready or they don't want ortho-K for whatever reason. And you can combine the atropine and the multifocals. You can combine the atropine and the contact lenses or the ortho-K as well, and you may get a higher rate of, be more effective at slowing down their myopia. There's no studies yet but they're working on them to show what combination might be best. Contact lenses and 0.01, 0.02, 0.05, 0.1, what's going to work. We're waiting on that data now. The latest shift in theory is that 0.01 is too low. The original Adams study which was 1%, showed a rebound effect. And Adam 2 which went way down to 0.01%, seemed to slow it as much as higher doses, but the axial elongation didn't slow, even though refractive error was kept regularly constant. And that's a problem. Our real goal, again, is to slow the axial elongation. So now the LAMP study is investigating different concentrations higher than 0.01. 0.01 is being used as a control, but they're trying 0.025 and 0.05. And what they've shown so far with 2 years of data is that 0.01 does not effectively slow the elongation. They're recommending 0.05. And if the child has some reaction to that in some way, you can always go down to 0.04, 0.03, or 0.025 if you need to. But 0.05 is now the recommended amount, concentration of atropine to try on children now. The JUICE study had 660 subjects, and they had 1% atropine every month for the first 2 years, treated one eye at a time, and then gradually withdrew to once every 2 months in the third year and recovery in the fourth year. And that showed an effective retardation of the progression of moderate myopia in school children. Now, there's a new compound. They've looked at other compounds as well, but none of them have really played out. There's a new compound they're looking at, and the way that they work is trying to decrease the scleral proteoglycans and collagens and the thinning in the posterior scleral. And the compound is called 7MX. Is this the trigger? Well, it counteracts the thinning of the posterior sclera that happens secondary to the peripheral deprivation, also known as the form deprivation. It appears to impact the growth mechanism. And in the first study, the 12-month data with 68 subjects was not compelling, but at 24 months, there was a significantly lower axial elongation. And the drug has low toxicity. This is an oral medication, something they take a pill. Low toxicity, no carcinogenic effects. And when they were stopped, both myopia progression and axial elongation resumed. So it's a future target, something really exciting that some places are studying now. We might find that the secret to controlling myopia, oddly enough, is having the child take a pill. Of course, that's always risky, and in children, we're very wary, and it's always our last option is to treat medically that way. Future pharmacy targets dopamine and acetylcholine, which has been studied in the past, but we see that these are linked to experimental myopia that's induced in animals. So we're going to give a blue rating, pharmacology. Now we're going to talk about vision training. I'm going to talk very quickly about vision training because it has a dubious history. All kinds of methods have been pitched and sold to people without clinical peer-reviewed data, such as Sleep Clearly method, something called the Bates method. And vision training, people who are experts in vision training have suggested that vision training helps to slow myopia, which I'm all for if they can show that in a peer-reviewed, randomized, longitudinal, hopefully, study. All have failed. All these studies in all these areas repeatedly fail to find an association between the amount of near work and incidence or progression of myopia and how that's impacted by vision training. We know See Clearly and Bates don't work. They're not even vision training. But vision training also hasn't worked. So vision training gets a big red grade. Nutrition, environment. Well, it's suggested that more time outdoors has been shown to decrease the likelihood of becoming myopic. Now remember, I want you to focus in on that becoming myopic. So that's going from having a emmetropic or a zero prescription or a hyperopic prescription and jumping into the minuses, into the myopic. So they suggest it could be vitamin deficiencies or more stimulation of the periphery when people are outdoors. And what we found that it is true that outdoor time prevents or delays the onset of myopia. It prevents or delays people from jumping over that zero mark from plus or emmetra or zero to minus, but it's not associated, if anything, related to progressing myopia in people who are already myopic. So once they become myopic, the recommendation to be outdoors or indoors, according to studies, has no bearing on their outcomes after that. The Allstack study, which had a huge subject group, 7,000, showed that children with little time outdoors were 40% more likely to develop myopia. And then this study in Singapore and Sydney was interesting because there was a lower prevalence in Sydney associated with increased hours of outdoor activities than in Singapore. Now, what was interesting about that is both studies were done with children of Chinese ancestry. So what was the difference between the kids in Australia and the kids in Singapore who had this similar genetic makeup? We don't have an answer to that. It's still being looked into, but it's a fascinating thing. So vision training gets a big nutrition environment get purple because it does not keep sending your kids who are already myopic outdoors does not lessen the rate of their myopic change. But the children who are not myopic yet, who might become it because one or both parents are myopic, it's a very good idea for them. Now, there's a new class of aberration controlling eyeglass lenses. We're going to talk about the Hoya MyoSmart DIMS lens, which has been shown in a study to reduce up as much as 59% and halt myopia, to curb it up to 59% and stop it by 21.5%. Now, this study, I warn you, was done by Hoya, so we don't have a study yet done outside of the company that is going to be manufacturing and selling these lenses. So I take those results with a grain of salt, but it is still fascinating. You can see here what the pattern is in that lens. When you shine light through it, the cells peripheral to the central vision create that hyperopic defocus. So the jury's out on the aberration controlling lenses, although the initial data is promising. That will be something interesting to follow. In the baseline exam, what I do is I collect information on the parent's history of myopia, their progression history, what activities the child is involved in, whether they're wearing spectacles constantly or specifically for activities, what their reading habits are, what their diet is. And then I take a detailed history. After that, I do a refraction and a cycloplegic refraction after. I do a regular refraction. I do a full binocular assessment, a topography of the child's eye. I look into their history. What rate are they changing at over time from other eye exams? And then I look at the axial length by A-scan. And I encourage people, we'll talk more about A-scans in a minute. The best way of tracking progression is the axial length. Is it a clinical necessity? I believe so, but as of now, there's no established criteria. There's no guidelines, and the data in a vacuum without being categorized by race, again, doesn't give us much information yet. There's no way to judge individuals' progression based on comparative axial length measures. No growth chart, as Kate Gifford out of Australia, who's a great person to follow, has said. Also, Maria Liu says there's a diurnal variability. So if you're measuring the axial length at different times of the day, you're going to get different readings. So we have to figure that out as well. Testing. These devices are not all the same. There's error, approximately 3 millimeter in the IOL master, and it varies based on some of the other ways we measure axial length, like with the handheld digital pachymetry-like devices, the head position, the calibration of the device, the ultrasound versus the fixed. You're always going to get a better reading in a fixed one as long as the child's forehead is pressed forward to test and they're in a similar position. The ultrasound, again, there's variability of the pressure, creating inaccuracies and repeatability issues. And I'm going to skip past this because that's something that we don't need to talk about today. The measurement devices, the IOL Master is the gold standard. Other good respected devices are the NIDEX scan, the LensStar, the Tomy, the Topcon Aladdin, and the Pentacam AXL. And the Myopia Master is being developed. I think it may already be in the market in the U.S. just for myopia axial length. So it's supposed to have some benefit over your standard axial length measurements. Now, in creating your strategy, we look at the child, we look at their refractive error, we look at their age. It may be hard to do ortho K or soft multifocal lenses on the child that's too young, so we'll go to the atropine. We may find that if they have too much SIL, the soft multifocal won't be a good choice because we can control up to 150 in ortho-K, and we go back and forth between these. I go back and forth to help my children choose. In one case, for instance, this 10-year-old Asian male came in with his parents with this prescription, 275 diopters of SIL in the right eye and 250 in the left. When I looked at the original topography, I realized that this child had mostly corneal SIL, and I knew that I could squeeze out most of that and squeeze out the refractive error based on what I saw in the keratometry. Well, guess what? I suggested that to the parents that we could give him myopia control. He'd still need to wear a minor prescription, probably around -1, to see if they didn't mind having regular thin glasses. Then I could get the pattern within the pupil and significantly reduce the peripheral refractive error, hyperopic defocus, to give him myopia control. They said they would be okay with that. And I just guessed I would get him down to 1 diopter. I got him to exactly -1 with this ortho-K pattern here, and the parents were thrilled. And the child is, so far, after 3 years of following, has been stable. So again, just to rehash, with ortho-K, you want good centration of the treatment zones. You want the optic zone smaller than the pupillary line of sight. What we don't know is how important is how quickly the peripheral plus ramps up from the blue area to the green area. We imagine the steeper the better, but again, studies need to be done on that. We think the more peripheral myopic defocus you create, the better, so that's why we go with the high ads, and we go with hopefully steeper zones. You can always make that zone smaller again if you need to increase myopia control. So with that, the talk is over. I want to thank you guys for taking that. I hope to get some, you can email me some questions. I'll be happy to try and answer a few of them if I have the time. And I look forward to presenting to you all again.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for such a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Shall we move to the discussion session?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, now we are about to start the discussion session. If you have any queries, then you can come up with your questions on our chat box. Dr. Allen will be happy to clear all your queries.
Okay, so let's see here. In a developing country like Nepal, what would you suggest for the new startups? In terms of starting up a myopia control, I would suggest, of course, you have to work with the tools that you have. We know ortho-K, we know the soft contact lenses that are multifocal, and we know atropine and bifocal contacts have an effect. I would suggest that if you're able to use all of those, I prefer ortho-K. I feel the data is much stronger. Or atropine, if you have the availability to prescribe that in your country. That's where I would start with. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, doctor, we have another question. And the question is, what is the end point of myopia medication, especially if there is no improvement?
So I'm going to repeat that so I make sure I heard it correctly. What is the end point? What is the goal?
Yeah,
is that what the question is?
Yeah, doctor, end point of myopia medication, especially if there is no improvement.
I got you. Well, if there's no improvement, then I'm going to try whatever method I'm using in combination with another method. Like, assume we're using atropine and we're not having the effect we want. I will combine it with maybe the ortho-K, or combine atropine with the soft distant center multifocals and continue to monitor it. And I might mix methods up. It's rare that I have that one or more than one of those methods doesn't work. So I can't really tell you what I do after that, but I would try to combine methods, or try, like if atropine didn't work, I might first go to just ortho-K. And if that didn't work, then I'd go back to ortho-K and atropine together. So I would combine methods. Endpoints are very variable because every child is genetically different and has different parents. My goal is to reduce change to less than a quarter diopter a year through their growing years. And that means through the child's years of 17 or 18 typically. and then take them off if their parents want and put them on standard optical treatment. And then if they come back in 6 months and their axial length again has started to increase, we go back to myopia control and monitor it every year and continue to try to take them off if they want. But because myopia control methods provide clear vision, and because wearing them is similar to wearing regular contact lenses or glasses, we really don't ever have to take a child off until they're a sufficiently older age. I have children who are now adults around the 25-year-old who still do it because they don't want to take the chance of changing. But I'm happy to take them off and give the parents a chance to go without it at the end of their growing years. Another question up here. What is the okay? Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay,
I
we have
will
also
point out
another question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the question is atropine 0.01% or 0.5%, which is better in your opinion? And is there any contraindication before starting the treatment?
The 0.05% has been shown to be the recommended dose now, 0.05. And contraindications, there are children who are on medicine, they're on certain heart I haven't listed this, but there's certain heart medications that might be a contraindication. It is an adrenergic medicine, so if they're on other adrenergic medicines, it might add to some symptoms. But since it's such a low percent, it's very rare. And of course, narrow angles might be a contraindication as well.
Okay, doctor. We have again another question, and the question is 10-year-old female has got prescription of 2 spherical power in right eye and 3 spherical with 1 diopter cylindrical in 90-degree axis in left eye. Her hobby is to swim. In this condition, will you give her ortho-K, or how will ortho-K help in this condition?
Is there an age to the child, or can you tell me the age?
Okay, doctor, I'm just putting the question on the comment section. I guess it will be more clear to you when you can see on the screen board. Can you? Yeah.
10-year-old female. Oh, 10-year-old. Okay, I got it. I'm sorry. 10-year-old, hobby is to swim. So I would likely give ortho-K to this child. If the two things, if the cylindrical is all corneal, it will go away. If none of this cylinder, if it's internal, it wouldn't. If it remained after ortho-K, it wouldn't be enough to cause blur for swimming. So she'd also, because the right eye would be so clear, the brain would depend a little more on the right eye than the left eye. But I think you could clear this patient up very, very well for everything, not just swimming.
Okay, doctor. We have again another question. How would
the 4,000 model 9? Okay. So I don't know the exact model of NIDEC, but the axial length measuring devices where the chin is fixed and the head is fixed and it's not ultrasound generally all work well. I don't suggest any particular brand. My experience is working with the IOL Master. So I have no commercial interest in that, but I like it and I'm used to working with it. But I would just say the rule is you can use any, I prefer not to use ultrasound if I didn't have to.
Okay, doctor.
All right.
These are only the questions that we have seen on our chat screen. We will be waiting just for a few more minutes. Anyone is willing to ask?
Sure.
I guess we have answered almost all the questions till now, and we haven't seen any questions as of now. So, considering the time limit, here I announce the closure of today's discussion session, and I would again like to express my immense gratitude towards our presenter, Dr. Alan, and to all the attendees as well. I would also like to thank all the direct and indirect helping hands for the ITEX program. Before wrap up, I request our today's presenter, Dr. Alan, to share his few words to our program.
Thank you so much. I look forward to presenting again in the future.
Yeah, that's great, doctor. Doctor, I have some interest regarding your ODS OAN yafit.com about this website, and I visited this website, and it's absolutely very beautifully designed website. So, can you please more explain about it and what is the purpose of this website once?
Sure. So ODs on Facebook is a group on Facebook where where optometrists and other eye care professionals join to discuss relevant clinical and practice management issues and network and have fun and learn from each other as well. It's open to ODs and opticians and ophthalmic technicians. It's the largest community online of any eye care community, and it's actually, in terms of number, the largest organization in the entire eye care industry worldwide. So it's something I started, and I admin this, and anybody who is an ophthalmic professional is welcome to join and watch in and participate in the conversation. We have people all over the globe in there. We'd love to have you all in there as well.
Thank you so much, doctor. So it's a really beautifully designed website, and we obviously want to join in the future soon. So I guess we are about to end up the presentation. So Solu, would you like to end up the presentation? Still, there is one question, doctor, and we are about to the presentation. So I will not going to take this question, and I obviously Gmail to you this question and forward to the attendees. So now I'd like to request Solu to end the session.
Okay, thank you. Have a great evening. Sorry it's so late there. Thank you for staying up for me.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Herewith,
Bye,
I
Dr.
announce the closure of today's webinar. Hoping to see you all again tomorrow. Stay safe, stay connected. Thank you.